we are live. Thank you all for coming to Blackstone Book Talks, Harnessing Personal Power in Narrative Nonfiction. Joining me for this exciting women's history themed discussion is Susan Purvis, the author of Go Find, as well as Cecilia Aragon, the author of Flying Free. I'm really excited to have these two in conversation. This has been a long time coming, and I'm just so excited to be able to kick off Women's History Month with you both. And I can't wait to hear the discussion between you two about your memoirs. Okay, so with that said, I'm going to let you both take it away, and feel free to let me know if you need anything.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Isabella. I've been looking forward to talking with Susan for some time. I just loved your book, and especially I think the theme of personal power is so wonderful and so apropos, because I have to say I personally really related to how you were often in this emotionally hostile environment, like that Crested Butte local ski patrol group, but you persisted, you kept on doing it, you didn't let them chase you out. And so I'm wondering, in what ways do you think your personal power has lessons for other women who want to succeed in male-dominated careers?
Yeah, great question. Well, right back to, I actually got a little lazy, so I listened to your audiobook, and I wanted to say, I can't believe you didn't read it. Oh, so anyway, it was a beautiful book. Personal Power. Well, I think there's so many similarities to our books, because I mean, I was just crying for you as a young girl. But to answer your question about personal power, I think I got my power from my mother, even though she was held hostage in her own life. She didn't go to college. She raised 3 kids. She's a stay-at-home mother and lived under the shadows of, my father. But yet she was strong-willed in her own way. And I used to be strong-willed, and then I lost my way when I got into a marriage, and I had to, fight my way to my own life, which took so much strength. So really, my little black puppy dog, revived me back into what my purpose and passion would be. And I know there's a lot of people in the audience who are, they're even maybe 40, 50, 60 years old going, what is my purpose? What is my passion? And I can only say, go for it, go figure that out and pursue it, and don't let anybody say no, as you can relate to that whole story.
No, I love that part about how you made that, how you just so graphically demonstrated what that meant in your life. And it was just a wonderful, empowering story. And
like I said, I was crying for you as a young girl. I didn't experience that. In my career, I worked in Latin America because I looked for gold, which probably you found quite interesting.
Yes.
What I wanted to touch on is that first moment you stepped in an airplane after college in your first career, where you're in a think tank environment, you're cutting edge technology, the only woman in the job, and you went for a flying lesson with your friend, or you went flying. And I just want for you to unfold that for the listeners on, we never know what we're going to end up doing. And that was profound for you.
Yeah, it truly was. Thanks for asking about one of my favorite moments of my life. So I grew up as a daughter of immigrants in a small Midwestern town. And as one of the few Latinas in town, I experienced a great deal of, stereotyping and discrimination. And as a result, I doubted myself. My parents believed in me, but they didn't really have the vocabulary to tell me, you are experiencing racism, you need to fight the racism. So I turned it in on myself, and I became very fearful and timid. And I was the sort of person who was scared of ladders. I was scared of heights. I was scared of doing anything that was the least bit daring. And that moment when I accepted this opportunity from a colleague to go flying was the first moment in my life, really, when I said to myself, I've been allowing my fears to define me for too long. I need to fight back. I need to do the things I'm not supposed to do. And I said yes. And even though it was terrifying, the whole experience of flying was incredibly, I mean, I was shaking the whole time, but it was also so wonderful and so beautiful because we flew out over the San Francisco Bay, and I still remember seeing the sun glittering over the water like a million gold coins, and the waves striking the California coast looked like lace. And I remember thinking, this is the most beautiful experience I have ever had. I want to learn to fly. But I thought, how can that be possible? That's not something someone, just like my teachers told me, someone like you couldn't possibly know all these advanced vocabulary words because we know you don't know English. You know, just because my parents spoke with thick accents, they had this stereotype. And so they thought less of me. And yeah, but that day in the airplane, I realized that I was going to have to fight through all my fears that had been placed on me by my society. And what I learned is that doing the difficult thing, doing something that challenges you emotionally, something that makes you, something where you feel like, oh, I'm not the sort of person who should do this, that is the best possible thing to do for personal growth. And I encourage everybody here to pick something really difficult and scary in their life and work towards it.
How old were you then? Were you like 22, 21?
I was 25.
Well, you were 25.
So
And
I had lived, yes. So I'd gone through my life until age 25 being afraid of everything. I mean, you have had this wonderful, adventurous life, going out in the wilderness. I didn't even go sledding as a child because my parents thought it was too dangerous. So you realize my parents are immigrants. They didn't know about American, sports. I certainly never went skiing or anything like that. That was all considered too dangerous. And my parents didn't fly. That was far too dangerous. But what my parents did do for me, particularly my father, is they gave me the confidence to fight, because my father told me, you can do anything.
I wanted to just flip something. Like, you had the academia wherewithal. I was the opposite. I've been told my whole life I wasn't smart. I wasn't a very good student. And so I went into my college years feeling like I could never be as smart as, the men I meet. I didn't know what I wanted to do. Nobody said I could excel at anything. So I was more of a tactile, in the field learner, which I think I got my power then when I was in the field doing hands-on, but I was a horrible student. And yet you had that and I didn't. And so I had the...
Well, I have, okay. So thank you for bringing that up, because first of all, your book shows, showed your lack of belief in your intellect, and yet you're incredibly intelligent. Nobody could do what you did without very strong intellectual capabilities. What I think it is sexism, because women in this country are not accepted to be brilliant. We're not supposed to be brilliant. It was my father that gave me the courage to say I was brilliant. My teachers didn't think I was smart. They thought I was plagiarizing when I did well. And so I had to fight that back. And it was my father who gave me that strength. And that one role model, that one voice of support. I mean, this is why I'm now in academia, why I'm a professor, because I want to be that voice of support for other young women or people of color who've been told, well, you're not as smart as the white men. And I tell them, no, you are smart. You are brilliant. You can do anything. And I love mentoring my students to do that. I just, yeah, wouldn't it have been cool if I could have mentored you in academia and you could have mentored me in the physical stuff?
Yeah,
Think
right?
about what we could have done even more.
I was wondering if you could like teach me and my girlfriends like engineering for dummies. We probably might do pretty well.
You would do really well, and you're not dummies. It's just
Oh.
if you have trouble in engineering and math, it's not you, it's the teacher.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not that they're a bad teacher, it's that they may not know how to teach somebody with your background. So this is what I do. I try to meet all my students where they are. So for example, sometimes a young woman will come into my university and she'll say, well, I'm not very good at math. And I'll say, everybody can be good at math, but maybe you weren't taught right. And then I'll take her back to the beginning and show her how to do it. And very often people learn it, you know, as long as they believe that they can do it. If sometimes they're really stubborn, like, no, I don't like math. And I'm like, I think you could like it. I think sexism has diminished you. Fight back, you know. Why are there so few women doing really cool stuff, you know?
Well, I think half the courage now is I would be the first one to say, take me back to 9th grade math. Like I would say that to you and say, take me through this. What did I miss? Here we go. That's is the kind of attitude people even listening who want to write books. It's like, oh, it's overwhelming. How do you write a book, right? We had to figure it out. And it's the same thing. All right, let's go back to 7th grade English. Like, how do I put a sentence together? So you can do anything you want, right? We just need the right mentors to take us on that journey.
So well said, Susan. I mean, no wonder you're an author and a great speaker because you say things so well. I mean, your book was inspiring to me, even though I've been living kind of an adventurous life as well, too. I'm like, oh, maybe I should learn how to do wilderness training, survival training, you know?
There is a question. Should we answer it?
Oh, okay, sure.
I'll read it and you can answer it.
All
How
right.
do you feel about the world of gender and stereotypes? Have we made improvements in shattering these dated preconceptions?
Well, thank you for that question, first of all. I used to believe that we were doing it, but especially in recent years, we've gone backwards. We are now denying what is going on in the world today. We're denying these unconscious biases that we all hold because we grew up in the United States. And I think we need to first acknowledge that they exist, and then we need to fight them. And that's really what it's going to take. And I think the way to do it is just one person at a time, really. I mean, I think it's also important to realize that I have caught myself saying sexist things and saying racist things. And that's part of my upbringing. And, you know, I believe in forgiving people who say these things, but admitting it, you know. It's not that I'm a horrible racist person. It's that I'm finding racist issues within myself and I'm fighting to overcome them. And I think that's something we all need to try to do is work to become the best we can be, the best possible version of ourselves, rather than sort of glorifying in our own bad sides, which I think has happened over the past few years.
I'll just add to that, you know, we become specialists, right? You know, I encourage people to become really good at one thing, and then you have a platform to speak about that. So out in the world, I have a platform. I can work among men, which mostly I do, like special forces. I show up, I have their attention, they're paying attention. But when it comes to my own turf, there's no respect, no attention. So that is an interesting regional thing. It's like we have to go outward in order to get the recognition. And it usually doesn't happen in your own backyard.
I think that's a really important point, Susan. I know that when I was flying air shows, I was paid a lot more when I crossed the Rockies. I mean, it was like the farther away from home you went, the more valued you were, which is kind of interesting. I think, again, that speaks to our society's prejudices.
Well, someone, there was just something in the chat box. Someone had read my book about Go Find, but they wanted to know, in a quick synopsis, what's your story about? I guess I could say it, but I want to hear how you
okay,
define
sure,
your
yeah.
story.
Thanks for pointing that out. I wasn't seeing all the chat questions, but yeah, so my story is about how a very timid and fearful daughter of immigrants grew up to overcome her fear and become the first Latina pilot on the United States Unlimited Aerobatic Team, which is the Olympics of aviation, where I fly loops and rolls and spins. And I competed in the World Championships and I still remember standing on the podium when they played the national anthem. And my immigrant parents were in the audience with tears in their eyes because they were so proud that their daughter was representing their adopted country. And that's really one of the proudest moments I have in my life. So yeah, so that's the short version, that I overcame fear, I overcame stereotypes in order to do that.
And how many women, in the history now are flying upside down and doing airplane acrobatics to this day? I mean, that is just crazy when I think about it.
Yeah, there are women in the sport who are wonderful and really amazing pilots, and the how many? The percentage of women pilots in the United States is about 10%, right? Who have licenses, and who do aerobatics. It's probably about the same. So yeah, we need more women in aviation too. I will say this, that there is a pilot shortage, and airlines are hiring, and these are good paying jobs. And, so they need everybody. So they will hire you even if you're a woman. And I should say too, that the aviation community, men and women, was incredibly welcoming to me. Even more so than the people that I experienced growing up. I think it's because there's something about sort of the double whammy of being both, Latina and female, and being really good at math and English, that kind of rubbed some of my male classmates the wrong way. I got bullied and I was beaten into unconsciousness once. But, as soon as I got out into the world of aviation, which I talk about in the book, I was welcomed by men and women, and I was valued for my accomplishments, for who I was, rather than a label that was put on me, when I was a young child. So that's so important, to value people for what they do, not, what their gender is or what their race is.
So one thing that is interesting about both of us, I have some similarities, and then about our writing and our story. What if you would have stayed in Indiana, right? I mean, what people might not know about you is you also went on and got your PhD. I think you're a little bit of an overachiever. Oh my gosh, right? In engineering. Well, I mean, that's like a feat in itself.
Yes.
But had we stayed in our hometowns, not that there's anything wrong with it, but for me, I had to go explore. And the one story I want to share with you, and you don't know about this because I didn't write about it in my book, is I wanted to be a pilot and I wanted to fly. But
it's not too late.
I didn't have the money. I didn't have a mentor. And how could I possibly make a living? And this is like in the early 80s. Yep. What I did do, though, is I flew a 177 Cessna from Montana to the Amazon and back with a colleague of mine to report on the burning of the Amazon. And even after that trip, we were gone for 3 months. Back in the late 80s, we did this. But I wanted to come back and be a writer and fly. And then everything just went whoop because it took money. I didn't know where it would lead me. How could I possibly do this? So I had to go look for gold instead so I can make, I knew that was quick, fast money.
Yeah.
So, what do we tell people about following their dreams? And it's funny because that happened back then. And then I get to be on a platform with you and you pursued that. I have so much respect for you. And I love in your book how you wove in your mathematics into your confidence to be able to fly. And that was a beautiful metaphor. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Oh, sure. All right. So yeah, first of all, I want to say, yes, flying is really expensive. I didn't have really a mentor. I did have this one friend who gave me one ride, but I had to pay for it all myself. Nobody in my family was a pilot. And so it is doable, but I had to work 2 jobs. And I talk about raising money in the book because that was a big part of my life. I always struggled financially. It's not like I was poor. I did have because I stayed in school eventually and got an engineering job. I was making $24,000 a year.
Right.
But it still wasn't enough to do the kind of flying I wanted to do. So I had to take on 2 jobs. And that, of course, that meant there were other things I couldn't do, like no social life, and my husband didn't want to pay for any of the flying. So I paid for it all myself. And we kept our finances separate just to keep that clear. Susan, I think that's one thing that you mentioned in your book about how your husband kept complaining about him spending money on you. And that was so obnoxious. That was one thing I did not want. It's like, no man will ever support me. I'm going to make my own money. And I actually think that I'm not answering your question. I'm sorry. But I think I'll finish this and then I'll go back to answering the question. I'm sorry. But I think it's really important for women to have an independent career and to bring in their own money to pursue their dreams. And I think it's challenging, but it can be done. All right. And it may take a long time. So I did get a PhD, but I didn't get it until I was 44. I actually didn't get my dream job as a professor until I was 50. So, don't think that you have to do things really early on in life. And I've had students who learned to fly who are 80, an 80-year-old woman took lessons from me. So it's never too late to do that. Did that answer your question or did I miss it, Susan?
No, I can't even remember what the question was.
Yeah, but I know that I think you are learning to fly now, aren't you? Isn't that right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of going back full circle.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I am flying again, and that's a beautiful thing. So because I'm with the sweetie who's a pilot. So that's beautiful. I want to talk about writing, just writing our books. Well, actually, there's a question. You women are an inspiration. Thank you. I left academia after 5-year postdoc in astrophysics at Harvard, in which I felt very alienated and could not find women mentors. Let me finish. Oh my God, what a great question.
Okay.
Do you have any comments about how to find support in the disciplines that really lack women in leadership roles, such as astrophysics? I wonder if I know who that is.
I love this question. I love this question so much. So because I actually wanted to work in astrophysics when I was younger, but I was told, oh, don't do it because there are no jobs. And maybe unsaid was no jobs for women. But I ended up getting in sort of a side door because I joined an astrophysics project because of my background in data science. And I actually have an hour-long talk on this, how I was able to solve this grand challenge astrophysics problem using my background both in data science and in my humanities background. I will say, okay, since we're talking about what it's like to, so I was the only woman in the group. I was the only computer scientist in the group. They were all men with PhDs in astrophysics. And I cried every day after I started the job because they were very hostile. I mean, similar to how Susan's coworkers treated her and telling me things like I didn't belong there. And what did work for me though, is I kept doing it because I could see that I could solve their problem. And I solved it when other computer scientists had failed. And after I did that, they all became my advocates because I solved a real problem that they needed. And, you know, so I think sometimes if you just push through a hostile environment, you know, don't give up. Don't say, oh, just because this is difficult and unpleasant, I should go do something else. Sometimes just by showing up and doing the work, you're making a difference. And it is hard to be the first. It's hard to be the pioneer. But I will say that think you can be a mentor for the other women who come after you, who want to be in astrophysics. And I know that for me, being one of the first in my field, it's really, really rewarding to know that other women are looking up to me now. And I have to say, I get emails and messages from women in data science who say the most wonderful things to me, and it is so rewarding. So it's worth it.
Well, I just want to say that that note is from my neighbor in Crested Butte. She is a young PhD astrophysicist. I just recently connected with her. I haven't talked to her in person. And I want to say she would come, she was from Oklahoma. And I hope that I was a mentor to her because I know I would put her in a hole and she would hide from my dog every time they were in Crested Butte. So Jess, I would love to get you and Jess together, Cecilia, and maybe you guys could talk science because I think she is maybe disillusioned. So, and then there's another question: how deep did you have to go introspectively to truly understand the wilderness? Whoo, the wilderness is my teacher. The more I talk about my book, and I really understood that the classroom really wasn't my teacher. It was the wilderness, all the hard lessons, the humility of it all, the growing up, putting your big girl boots on. The wilderness doesn't care if you are shivering and freezing cold and ready to die. So, preparation, respect for the wilderness. I'm glad I got a chance to write about it, and I'm still not done. I feel like I'm just starting, to understand my voice and the power of a career in the outdoors.
I will say that is something that I loved about your book, Susan, is the way you describe the wilderness and the way, you just stepped up to it. I mean, because this is something that I didn't have any experience with. I mean, I don't have confidence that I could go into the wilderness and survive. I probably couldn't, but I know from reading your book and from my own experience, I could learn, and it just seems so incredibly rewarding to have that connection with nature, because that is one thing that I do talk about a little bit in my book as well, is that you might think that flying in an airplane separates you from nature, but you're really in this vast flow of, this vast atmosphere that is kind of like the wilderness. It's very unforgiving. It doesn't care the updrafts and downdrafts and the storms. You're tiny. You have to learn to work with it and to understand it. And so so interested in weather and understanding the airflow. I loved, Susan, one of the elements you talked about was how the scent molecules, would form a scent cone, and how they would come down the, the valleys in the mountains. And that was wonderful because I related it to what I know about airflow as a pilot, because a downdraft in the mountains is incredibly dangerous. So that was fascinating.
Someone wants to know your favorite flight or your favorite journey. I would love to hear that.
Oh, I think my favorite flight was when I flew. It was my medal winning flight at the World Aerobatic Championships in France. When I flew, and we were near the coast, it was sunny and gorgeous. And I was in a flow state. I lived with being afraid of flying a lot and kind of had to force myself to overcome that. But on that day when I was flying, I felt no fear whatsoever. I was just excited. I was one with the wind and the air, and I was dancing in the sky. I was a part of the world around me, and it was beautiful.
I ditto that. I think on the missions that I was on, and I'm communicating with my dog. We know our job. We are one with the elements. That was, the sweet spot. And it goes back, someone said, describe what it means to us what does it mean to be an empowered woman? And I'm going to just say, it's that free flow state. When you say something even to a friend, and it's your truth, it's uninhibited. That's called finding your voice, being empowered to me.
Yes.
All the way up, to a stage of 1,000 people.
Right. I put that quote, empowered women empower women, on my Instagram. And what I see it as is, hearing Susan's story, because she is so empowered, makes me feel stronger. And so I feel that every woman who goes out there and fights the stereotypes and who lives an adventurous, thrilling, exciting, powerful life is empowering other women. When I hear someone who's become a CEO, someone who is a daredevil, base jumper, whatever it is, whatever they do, just hearing their stories makes me feel stronger and encourages other women. I know young women who are learning what they want to do in their life tell me the same thing, that they feel empowered by hearing these stories. We just need more stories of powerful and exciting women.
I wanted to say, I learned to be powerful from a lot of my girlfriends and my mother. For example, when I took a job in Houston when I was an environmental geologist, and I was getting sexually harassed, and I was like, it's okay, he can grab me or whatever. And my girlfriend's like, no. And she's this 5-foot tiger, and she went straight to the top. And I'm like, oh no, I'm going to get in trouble. And she's like, this is not acceptable. She went and told on this guy. And I went, oh, I shrank and we were so used to just dealing with it. And she's like, absolutely not. And I went, wow. She's still my dear friend, Amy Bright, if you're out there. And she had my back.
Isn't that
nothing really happened to the guy, but I got transferred. And that's when I stood in that power and said, well, I'm never going to let this happen to my girlfriend.
Yes, that's a wonderful story. And there's a question that somebody asked that I really want to hear more too, is, Susan, what lessons did Tasha teach you? I love Tasha so much.
Well, patience, and always remember, my agenda isn't somebody else's agenda. And we can't shove our agendas down an animal or a human. And that's interesting, you bring it to the work environment, right? It's like, wait, I want this to go through. How come you can't see what I can't see? And that's just not the case. You know, there's got to be 15 different ways to explain it and do it and show it. And then it gets digested. And either, you know, the animal or the human will perform, or they won't. So I learned that there's just not one way to do things.
So wonderful. Your relationship with Tasha was so heartwarming and so inspiring, and just, I mean, it just made me
We don't have
happy.
children, right?
I'm sorry?
Well, we don't have children, probably that's why. I wanted to talk about our books real quick, because in the beginning, I know I didn't know anything about your book, but you're foreshadowing all the marital problems like I did. Yours turned out, I think, for the good. Well, and mine, you know, ended in disaster, but maybe it's all for the good.
I think for the good for you, yeah. Yeah, I mean, no, it's true. I mean, so my husband and I came to a negotiation, but I think men in our society too are often taught in ways that are not good for them either. And so I've been with my husband now for almost 38 years. But in the beginning, we had some difficulties over my flying. As a matter of fact, he told me, Cecilia, when I met you, you used to be able to converse on, you know, on any subject under the sun, and you were interesting. And now all you talk about is flying. And he had a point. So I did learn to maybe back off a little bit on the flying enthusiasm. But he also, I feel, by telling him what I needed, I said, look, I need to have this independent way of life. And it's really important that you acknowledge this. And he was a really good person. He is a really good person. And so I think he took a step back and said, oh yeah, I have these stereotypes that I've been fighting against my entire life, but I love you and I want to work something out with you. So.
Well, it's interesting. Was your mother a professional?
Yes. So my mom is a story of, both my parents were really supportive, but my mom, you know, grew up in the Philippines, and she was taught that she always had to follow her husband. And so she followed my dad. And I remember thinking I didn't want to do that because she was unhappy. She trained to be a chemist, and she was incredibly artistic. She was a writer. She was an award-winning photographer. She actually wrote her own memoir, a memoir called Birthdays in the Cemetery, if anybody's interested. And it's fascinating and beautifully written. And her name was Katinka Rodriguez. And I feel that she encouraged me, but she never fought back, perhaps because her husband, my dad, was so supportive of her. And she grew, you know, she grew up during World War II. You know, she experienced terrible poverty. She had open sores on her legs growing up. She, you know, they didn't have, her mother died in childbirth. I mean, I don't want to go on and on about it, but she had terrible medical care, and really suffered as a child. And I think for her, what mattered the most was, I need to do whatever it takes to survive this war. And she survived World War II. She came to the United States, and for her, survival was about fitting in. And in those days, in the 50s, the roles for women were very, very limited. And because she was an immigrant, she didn't feel she could speak up. She didn't want to criticize her adopted country because both my parents loved the United States and were grateful to the US for all the amazing opportunities that it gave them.
Well, there's a couple more questions. I know we're getting close to running out of time, but there's some great ones. women's history theme. Oh no, I just got providing healing, promoting hope. Can you touch on the source of hope and healing?
Why don't you take that, Susan?
Yeah, I mean, in my third act, because I'm in my 60th year now. Even though, for those of you who haven't read my book, I got involved in wilderness medicine. So I've been teaching people how to save lives. You know, my work with my dog helped me save my own life. And so in general, I'm a healer. And my job is to help people, you know, mind their truth, live their best life, find purpose and passion. So what's that, you know, hope is, you know, give, be kind, be good at something so that you can give back and find a way so you're not always struggling, but you can, you know, blossom. And it doesn't have to be really profound.
Exactly.
And how do we promote hope? You know, by helping your colleague in collaboration. I'm a huge fan. I can't really do anything by myself, even though I appear to be super independent. I am the first person to lean on my girlfriends and guy friends for collaboration. I'm only as good as the people around me. And so I hope that I let them know that and that I can help them on their journey as well.
Beautifully said, Susan. I love that. And I should just say I'm also a big believer in collaboration, and some of my work in human-centered data science involves looking at how people mentor each other. Even young people, young kids will mentor and help each other, and how much that means and how much we all learn from this kind of distributed mentoring, not a formal mentoring session at all.
Ooh, that sounds fascinating. Will you be publishing that, or is it being published?
Yeah, actually, okay. I said I wasn't going to talk about this, but I do have a TED talk on distributed mentoring and fan fiction that just came out the day before yesterday. So if anyone's interested, they can go to ted.com/talks, and I'm one of the more recent talks. But and it's about fan fiction as well too, which I don't want to get into because this talk is not about that. But interestingly, young girls do empower themselves by mentoring each other and by writing stories. So this gets back to, I guess, Susan's question about how do we learn to write? And it's really hard, I think, especially for young women to learn to write and to have the confidence that their writing is beautiful and strong, because so many more men than women get published. You imagine that, oh, it's a meritocracy, right? Well, it's not. You know, it's much easier to be published if you're a man. Just look at the statistics. But still, women have a lot of wonderful writing. And I love to read books by women because of how they empower me and how they speak truth. I think in many ways, women, because we grow up in this society, we see what all humans are going through, whereas sometimes I think men don't have as clear a view into women's minds because it's not as open. So I find women's writing to be very deep and truthful and powerful.
Yes, we get down to that emotional level. Since the third grade, I always wanted to be a writer. And again, I never had that confidence. No women in my community were writing books. In 1980, when I just entered college, I wanted to write for Outside magazine. It just turned up on the street. It was all, I think, mostly men writers. And I'm like, what story could I possibly share? And I was on my bike traveling the world, and I just let that go. And I said, by golly, when I moved back to Montana, I said, I'm going to sit down and write a book if it kills me. So I want to give a big shout out to Blackstone for taking us on.
Yes, thank you, Blackstone. You are the best publisher ever. Oh. And when I talk to my other writer friends, they're amazed at all the things you do for us authors and how you support us. I mean, look at this. I mean, our books, Susan's and my books have been out for a couple of years, and yet you are still supporting us by having events like this. You know, no other publisher does this, big publishers, small publishers. So thank you. Thank you for supporting us and for just being fun to work with in so many ways.
Someone has a STEM question. Can you tell us what STEM stands for?
Oh.
And how can we get more girls and women into the STEM programs?
All right, thank you for asking that. I apologize if I said STEM. It stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. And it means, yeah, getting women into these fields because first of all, it is so powerful for women to be in there, and it improves the fields. All right, so engineering and data science is better and more ethical and more impactful when there are women as well as men in the field. And also, it's a great field for women to be in because it's really fun and exciting, and you have independence. There are good salaries, and you can change things. It's the women in data science now who are who are taking the lead and making it more ethical. And we need you, and if somebody tells you it's too hard for you, or, oh, I'm interested in working with people, data are people. And that's the thing that, that we want to break the stereotypes. Women are logical, men are emotional. You have to understand that the gender role stereotypes are simply not true.
There's a question. Thank you for that. How do we get more girls into the search and rescue community? And do you see this space becoming more expansive? It's an opportunity to grow and to gain skill sets. So yes. And I don't know what the ratio is, but I'm sure it's slim, because you have to have an iron gut to put up with all the crap that's associated with these, like a volunteer group like search and rescue. So I would say yes, go into search and rescue, especially if you have a strong skill set in one area, but then you start to learn all the other disciplines, which really just makes you become a more capable human being. The one thing I did early on in my career, right out of college, because I didn't know what I wanted to do, is I became a survival instructor, where I would do 21 days with the hoods in the woods, we called it. And we'd march these kiddos through the desert. This was in the mid 80s. And I tell you what, that was probably the most important thing I could do for myself, because I learned if I could live off the land, learn these basic skills of survival, I could do anything. Except probably get my PhD in engineering.
Oh, come on, you could do that. No, I love that. And that's a theme I think that we both echoed in our books, is doing something really difficult and challenging gives you the confidence that you can do anything. And so I used learning to fly to help me do all these other things in my life, like do really difficult science that enabled me to, shake the hand of the president. And I mean, so you can really accomplish so much if once you picked one thing. And the one other thing I do want to say, Susan, that I think is that what struck me in your book is how much you're caring for other people, and your desire to save lives stood out. And it seems to me that search and rescue is a natural for women, because women want to help other people. I mean, we don't, I'm sure we have egos too. I'm sure we want to be the one who gets the recognition. Of course, we're human. But it seems to me that the only reason there aren't more women in search and rescue is because of the hostile environments that you describe. And so I'm hoping that through the mentorship and role model of people like Susan, the more young girls will start doing this. I mean, maybe form an all-women search and rescue team. I
don't even think that is even out there, but I love that idea. Yeah, that's great. Technology and social media is growing like wildfire. at the age of digital distraction, what is something you'd like the next generation of girls to know? Ooh, yeah, that's a yummy question.
So I study social media for my work. And one of the unfortunate tendencies of social media and the way it's being used now by companies is they want to prioritize engagement. And it turns out that negative emotions get people riled up and get more people to click on things. So what this means for young girls in our society is that they are bombarded with these negative images at a very formative period in their life. And as a matter of fact, researchers at Facebook discovered that that Facebook's algorithms were having a negative impact on the health of young teenage girls. But instead of changing their algorithm, because they just wanted clicks, 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 they ignored the research. And so women went public about it. And I'm hoping that the pressure, that if we all can put pressure on Facebook and say, we like to use your tool, we think it's great, but you have to take a proactive stance and recognize that your algorithms are doing harm. And instead of emphasizing engagement, you have to say, we are going to emphasize positive emotions over negative emotions to give people support and to so that we don't tear down young people, particularly young girls, and instead we build them up and strengthen them. And so I hope Facebook, if you're listening, if you're people in power at Facebook, that you will do the right thing. Do the right thing. You can still make a lot of money, even if you don't maximize, negative impacts. So please think about using your technology as a force for good.
What I've learned, for those of you who don't know, I've had my own company for the past 25 years. Owning your own company is one of the most important things you can do in life. Again, it brings you back courage, empowerment, managing your own money, having a great work ethic. So I teach wilderness medicine and avalanche courses. And one of the reasons why I still teach is I'm get my hands on the 16 to 26-year-olds. And the women coming through my courses are amazing. They're like really smart, healthy, fit, exuberant, go-getters. What do I attribute that to? Probably their love for the outdoors. I don't know. I mean, those are the populations I see, but I am impressed with these older girls and young women and how they're living their lives and operating. And so all I can say to that question is keep at it. Yes. Maybe you live out of your car so you can live your dream. Don't get bogged down with furniture and stuff, which, I lived out of my car for years. I was kind of a dirtbag, and it gave me the freedom to pursue my passion.
Wow, I love that answer so much, Susan. I want to echo that I work with undergraduates, and they are so amazing. They're so alive. They're so aware. They love the outdoors. They're aware of what's going on in the world. And I've also had my own company for about 30 years. And I agree. It taught me so much about managing my money, about, right? I mean, I think, work ethic, wanting, having a view of what my taxpayer dollars go toward, because that's so important as well, too. I think business owners really get a great view of, what are the priorities? What should we be doing in the world, and how should we spend our resources? And I personally believe that small businesses are making, they're what make the US really great, I'm not so confident about the large companies, but the small ones are just amazing. I mean, the people I meet who run their own companies are just incredible, just in every possible way. So
I have a question for you. Going back to science and technology 101. So I'm learning to fly again, and I feel like I'm such a retard.
no, you're
Will
not.
you take me on a math and science baby pilot class 101? Maybe we could start
I
something.
would love to meet you, and we should definitely fly together. And I'm happy I think we should teach each other, because I want to learn about how to survive in the wilderness. I love the outdoors, but I have never had the opportunity. I mean, that's one, you only have one life, right? You can't choose everything, but I have always wanted to. I love the forest. I love planting trees and being out, digging dirt and having a garden, and I want to learn more about it. So yes, let's meet. And since we can both fly, you're in Colorado, I'm in Seattle, we're not too far away.
No, I'm in Montana, and
Oh,
and I live on a runway.
You have your own runway?
I live on a runway.
Oh my God. Okay. I will fly to Montana and we will do all this, because that's one of my plans for the summer, is to fly to Montana, actually. Will you show me around?
Yeah, of course I will. Yes.
It's a date.
There's one last question. Let's see. I don't know. Are we speaking for an hour? What do you wish you could have told yourself as a young girl? And what does finding freedom look like for you now? I'm going to say I'll answer the last half right now, and then I'll let you start.
Okay.
Finding freedom means, I have my own company. I have a platform. Now that COVID's over, I'm getting called. I can't be at a million places. I have to say no. But freedom to me means having my own company and choosing the jobs that make a difference, and in sharing my knowledge and passion with anybody who wants to hear about it.
That is so lovely. So what I would have told 12-year-old Cecilia. So I want to say that that's the reason I wrote my book. And, this is a story that I really wanted to tell, because when I was 12, I believed that I would never do much. I thought that I was destined for a quiet and dull life. And I hated that idea. And so I wrote this book. So if I could go back in time and give my book to that 12-year-old me and say, you can do it. You will get out of this, because I know my childhood was really miserable. I do give talks and I show these pictures, these embarrassing pictures of myself as a kid, and the thing you notice is that I'm always frowning in them, because I was so miserable and unhappy. But now I have a good life. I mean, there's a lot of horror and difficult things in the world today, terrible things going on, like the war in Ukraine. I feel for all the people who are suffering and dying, but we can still build a happy and hopeful life, and we can fight for doing the right thing. And I think we have to keep on doing that. So freedom for me is doing what you do best and shining your light, even in the darkness. And that's what I feel is incredibly important for all of us to do, and to encourage each other to do.
And I will say, what would I tell my 12-year-old self? It's this. I didn't want my mother's life, and I held that secret for so long. I'm like, I cannot be a stay-at-home mother living in this dark house, screaming kids. She came home unhappy. She was overweight. She never exercised. There wasn't a whole lot of joy, except when she was with her girlfriends.
Yeah.
So I finally told my mother that maybe 8 years ago. I'm like, Mom, I have a confession. She's like, what? And I'm like, I had to do something. I didn't want your wife. And it was like all my effort to get that out of my mouth. And she leaned into me. I was just waiting for, you're a horrible daughter. And then she leans in and says, you know what? I'm like, what? She goes, I didn't want that life either. And I went, oh, so it's a reminder. Don't be afraid to say what's really on your mind and go after what you want. Don't let anyone stop you. So freedom is, you and I, I'm living my best life, and
Yes.
staying healthy and happy is probably my priority. Staying fit and eating clean.
Yes, yes. I love that. Yeah, exercising, being fit. No, this is actually, thank you for bringing that up, because my mother was a stay-at-home mom while I was a child. And I felt the same way. She was happy. My dad was wonderful to her. But there was always something missing in her life, because she wasn't able to really achieve what she had thought she would achieve. She was going to be a doctor. She thought she would be a doctor when she was a child. And, the wonderful thing about my mother, though, is that she always knew as a child. I always said I didn't want to do that. And she still loved me despite me being maybe a little too critical of her, because I would see her cooking and she would say, you have to learn to cook, because when you get married, you'll have to cook for your husband. And I said, no, I'm never cooking. He will have to cook for me. And hey, guess what? My husband does cook for me. He's the cook in the family. So, there are ways to work things through, and you can still love someone even when you don't agree with all their choices or what they have done. And I take my mother's emotional strength, the way she always loved me, and kind of her courage, leaving a land full of war and making a new life in a place where she didn't speak the language or know the culture. And, raising children to be strong and loving. And I hope I pass that on, because I have 2 children that I love so much and who are now in their 20s and who are good human beings, who are successful, who are wanting to change the world in a positive way. And I'm so proud of them.
I have one last question. How long did it take you to write your book from the time you sat down with your full-time job and you're flying and, maintaining your relationship? I'm going to say it took you 2.5 years.
That's a good guess. So I always tell people that's a trick question because I wrote the first draft of the first chapter of my memoir in 1999. It was published in 2019. So you could say it took 20 years.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I wrote the full first draft of what became my memoir in 3 months. So it's somewhere between 3 months and 20 years. So maybe 2.5 years is about right. Because it certainly takes a lot of writing and rewriting to write. Yeah. I'm sure Susan knows this too. You don't just sit down and drop a book out of, your navel or whatever. You need to rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it.
In my naivete, which I had a lot of in my book when I got my dog, I said to my girlfriend when I was ready to write a book, I go, you think I could write my book in about 3 months? And she was painting the outside of my house. She goes, well, I don't see why not. Okay. 8 years later, right? The blood, sweat, and tears.
Yep. It is possible to write a first draft in 3 months, but that was a terrible first draft. So it needed the work it got. And there was a huge team, which I know Susan thanked all the team members in her book, and I did as well too. So from girlfriends to writing group members, to editors, people that I hired, people whose classes I took, of course, all the wonderful team at Blackstone that it took to make the book in its final form, which is really so, both these books are so beautiful. And so
they're so beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It takes a while, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't sit down and do it and say, yeah, let's try it in 3 months.
So Cecilia, probably people say I'm strong and I'm brave. I tend to disagree, but probably the one thing I will not do is get in your airplane and do all the spins and turns. There is no way. That sounds like a good way to die. And I want to know why you haven't died.
Challenge. You are challenging me. So I teach aerobatics. And I have over 5,000 hours of flight time, never had an accident or an incident or an insurance claim, nothing. And I have taught dozens, maybe hundreds of people to fly aerobatics. Not one has even gotten sick. And they all land on the ground with big smiles on their faces and say they loved it. So when I come to visit you,
Yep.
you know,
will you bring your aerobatic plane?
I probably won't, because
Yeah.
the plane I'm planning to travel in is not an aerobatic plane.
What do you?
But someday you can come and visit me.
Well, I'll take you whitewater rafting and hike and take you on the
Oh my
Highland
gosh.
Trail in Glacier National
Whitewater
Park.
rafting? Okay, maybe not. That sounds a lot more scary and dangerous than doing loops in a plane. I think we have a challenge for each other.
Yeah, it was just so wonderful to hear about both of your books and your personal experiences. I mean, I know I already want to go and climb a mountain. I want to fly a plane and I want to do it all. I just really appreciate you both sharing your experiences so candidly and sharing how women can not only learn from, your experiences, but also pave the way to make their own personal growths and their own personal triumphs. It's such a special way to kick off Women's History Month. And I so appreciate you guys, sharing your time and your experiences. And if you are just now tuning in, we're speaking with Susan Purvis, the author of Go Find, as well as Cecilia Aragon, the author of Flying Free, both books of which are available now in all formats. And I can say myself that they are great reads, great authors, and it's been a wonderful event. And I'm so glad to have had you both join it.
And thank you so much, Isabella, for hosting us. And I'd like to thank everybody who joined the webinar. Thank you so much for coming and listening to our story. That's, after all, why we write, is for others to, to communicate with others. So thank you. We are very grateful.
Yes, and thank you for your questions. Those were some fabulous questions that were asked. I love them.
Amazing questions. And there's nothing more exciting than some great questions.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Blackstone Publishing. I just wanted to say this is the banner that was flying at the Javits Center during Book Expo America. I was just a country bumpkin coming from Montana to Book Expo, where my book was being debuted. And this was one of, I think, 6 books showcased on the outside of the Javits Center. I nearly fell out of the cab when I saw it. And that was a surprise for Blackstone. So thank you. And I want to thank all the listeners, and feel free to reach out to myself or Cecilia. We're both online. We'd love to interact, answer questions. And I can't wait to listen to your TED Talk.
Thank you, Susan. And you know what? Maybe we should take our show on the road. So,
yeah,
I mean, that's one of the things I was hoping. My book came out in the pandemic, but I'm hoping that maybe we can do a book tour. I mean, I know it's kind of late, so it's not official, but we could maybe fly around the country, Susan, and maybe there are other women pilots of women authors of Blackstone that could join.
Well, I think you're onto something. So one of the questions someone asked is, what's our next adventure? And I think it's that, because we have a lot to say.
Yes, I want to read it all. Anyway, bye.
Thank you so much for joining, and thank you guys again. This was a wonderful chat.
Thank you.